So, on the day I'm recording this, in light of the unprecedented circumstances we have in Indian Wells, with all the semifinalists, I believe, being outside the top 25 for the first time in the history of Masters 1000 events being held, I thought this might be a good time to decompress and sort of just evaluate the state of the men's game at the moment. I could take this moment to bash the next generation, because that probably does seem like a trendy take at the moment, but that would be ignoring context altogether, and it's once again a case of being spoiled by the big three if you're angry at these guys and stacking them up against the big three, even Andy Murray's resume at these guys' age, and saying, well, it doesn't stack up at all. But that's kind of a tired talking point at this juncture, and a lot of us have to come to grips with the fact that this generation is not those guys. You're probably never going to see a generation like those guys again. And that is exactly why much of this season has felt so bizarre. We've seen the big three's grip on pretty much all the major tournaments be eased more and more, really ever since, I would say, 2016-ish, but this is about as close to relinquishing their grip as we've ever seen, and you can point to Djokovic winning 3 majors this year and say, how could that be? Well, for one, back during grass season, I was getting a lot of comments when I ever mentioned the big three, saying it's not a big three at the moment, it's just Djokovic right now. And honestly, there is truth to that now at this point in the season, probably at that point as well, even though Nadal had a pretty solid clay court season. But at this point in time, it's very much just a big one, and Djokovic still going relatively strong. Not as much as his 3 slams this year would indicate, in my opinion, but that's just me. Regardless, Novak is an anomaly right now. It's very much a big one right now, as I said. They've always been tethered together as the big three, and legacy-wise into the future, no matter what happens as far as the slam race goes, they always will be linked as the big three. But right now, for the first time, it has really just been the one that's been holding it down. We've seen periods due to injuries or whatever it may be, such as portions of 2016 when Federer and Nadal were out, as well as the back end of 2017 when Djokovic and Murray were pretty much non-factors there. And it's elicited a lot of wonky results. But at the end of the day, in both of those years, which are probably the most comparable as far as the most depleted parts of the season to this one, you still had 2 guys that took home the biggest prizes in the sport for the most part, and were very much considered the top dogs, with a significant gap between them and those that were beneath them. That gap has shrunk this year between just one guy in Djokovic and the rest, and you've seen it in pretty much all of his slam wins this year. He's been on the ropes at some point or the other. It's always really just come down to the mental superiority of Novak Djokovic that has made the difference most of the time. But bottom line, regardless of how big or small I think the gap is between Novak and the rest of the field, this really has been the first season, I would say, since like 2007, where you can say it isn't a big three this year. And that has bore itself out in so many different ways, whether it's eye test, whether it's statistically, going back to our Indian Wells semifinalists today with Dimitrov, Norrie, Fritz, and Basilashvili. I mean, it's not that any combination of those guys is going to face off for the Indian Wells title, because wonky stuff like this has always happened. post-US Open. I mean, fatigue kicks in at this point in the season, wear and tear kicks in, so you have a lot of injuries at this point in the season. I've seen a Masters 1000 final between Jack Sock and Filip Krajinovic, so this isn't much of a drop-off or anomaly at the end of the year where I can be like, oh, only in 2021 will you see a final like this. But what is worth noting is that now, at this point in the season, 7 Masters through, I believe, there's only been 2 guys that have appeared in multiple Masters finals this year, and that is Sasha Zverev in Madrid and Cincinnati, and Andrei Rublev in Monte Carlo and Cincinnati. The men's game over the past couple of years, that is just mind-boggling, especially because the big 3, among all of them, have only won 1, and that was Nadal at Rome. Djokovic, the most prolific Masters 1000 player of all time, he has only reached 1 final, and that was also Rome. And yes, you can say the focus of all these guys now is slams. We're not taking into account Federer because obviously age and attrition has taken its toll on him. We don't really know how much juice is left in the tank. But as far as Nadal and Djokovic are concerned, even in their post-prime years, they had been rattling off multiple Masters a season still. And yes, injury and just prioritizing the slams for those guys, particularly Nadal and Djokovic, that has contributed to the record of Masters this year being so overwhelmingly in the next gen's favor. I'm pretty sure Djokovic has only played 2 all year, Nadal 3, and the year number 1 sometime in the future, maybe even next year, back in 2020. And I wouldn't say unreasonably so. A lot of people thought he would continue into this next year in 2021 and perhaps bag a major or multiple. I just couldn't get on board with that because a lot of people who were on that boat were acting like he won his US Open under normal circumstances. And now when I look back, honestly, Dominic Thiem's path to his US Open title was still arguably, even with Djokovic in the final, more difficult than Daniil Medvedev's just on paper. But the difference here is that we have seen someone now get over the big 3 hurdle, beat one of them, beat the one that had been so great all of this year, beat the one that had continually denied the next gen in Novak Djokovic in the final of a US Open with so much on the line. It may seem unfair because Thiem has indeed beaten Djokovic and Nadal at majors before, matches that were very important. It's why I made the case last year that it wasn't a foregone conclusion that if Djokovic didn't get defaulted, he had that US Open in the bag, because I don't think it was a foregone conclusion at all. At the time with how Thiem was playing, I still would have given him a shot to beat Novak. You know, for Thiem and his slump this year, it's kind of wrong place at the wrong time, and it may seem unfair, but Medvedev actually crossing the finish line against who he did it against does give his win a sense of legitimacy and a feeling that those legends of the sport, particularly Nadal and Djokovic over the past 2 years in particular, they're not totally invincible, and Nadal's barrier had already been broken. I would go as far as to say at the back end of last year, because until we saw some slippage this year in his play, in his health, you could make a good argument that Rafa had still been the toughest puzzle for the next generation to figure out, because Tsitsipas to that point had only beaten him 1 time, Zverev also had only beaten him 1 time, Medvedev had never beaten him, but that started to change as last year waned and continued into this year. And with the changes I've outlined happening outside the slams, now that you've actually seen one of the next-gen guys beat Djokovic in particular in a big spot, in a Grand Slam final, it does kind of give you cause to pause. The chinks in the armor are now showing more than ever, And in spite of a year where Novak Djokovic still won 3 slams, this is the one that actually feels different. It's not a total changing of the guard, obviously, for the aforementioned 3-slam Djokovic season we just came off of, but I do feel we're going to look back on 2021 as the year that the transition truly began. And moving forward with the landscape of men's tennis moving that way, it is interesting to see how engagement is going to be affected, because in my experience, most of the tennis fans I know are fans of one of the big 3. For the most part, I have found that those fandoms do not think the way this game is trending is good. It seems that seeing more and more finals, big finals, and yes, Masters are still big, even if our favorite players no longer prioritize them, but seeing these finals with the Noris versus Basilashvilis of the world, albeit great players, but it does seem that a lot of people think the state of the tour is dire at the moment. And on the other side of the coin, there are those that are tired of the same old names for the better part of the last 2 decades, dominating, claiming all of the world's biggest titles year after year after year. And to those people, I would caution you, be careful what you wish for, because yes, new blood is nice. It's nice to see someone else win for a change, but you do kind of have to specify what you really want, because the matches like this upcoming Indian Wells final, all due respect to everyone who is in contention to make it, all great players, but when it comes down to it, the spectacle isn't nearly the same. What it comes down to me is you gotta have a great rivalry to gain more intrigue, and we're yet to get that out of the next generation. There's yet to be one really epic banger of a match between any of the next generation players among one another. Most of their matches are usually very tense and nervy, not particularly great tennis. And it's for that reason that I would be a bit concerned, and I am of the mentality that we should hold on to the big 3 as long as possible. Now again, I'm just saying there's a lot more parity in today's game, and I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing, but nonetheless, I certainly don't think that Novak Djokovic is done, not in the slightest. He is still going to be the man to beat next season, and I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion at this point. Somehow it might be, but I don't think Rafa's done either. I still think he has some juice left, and at the very least he should be given the benefit of the doubt after coming back from so many injuries. Just see how he looks once he gets healthy. It's been a while since we've seen a healthy Rafa Nadal, so I'm just gonna wait until 2022 to make any more concrete judgments on that. All in all, the next gen have clearly taken even further strides this season. They've made sure that they will no longer be taken lightly and not be the butt of Novak Djokovic's jokes at trophy ceremonies. But this year, and really this tournament at Indian Wells, is a bit of a microcosm and has told us that they are still far from perfect. But yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm just waiting for Turin. The biggest storyline of this home stretch potentially would be Medvedev's chase for number 1. That is now over. So with not much going on, I just decided to make this video evaluating the landscape and current state of the men's game. There were plenty of avenues to go about this, so this video might have seemed like it was all over the place, but in reflecting about a lot of stuff that went down this season on a whim, that's kind of something that was prone to happen. But I hope all that were watching were still able to enjoy. If so, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all for watching, I appreciate it greatly, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.